Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm going to start by expressing my sympathy for the principles that are in this bill. My grandfather will be spinning at a high rate of knots in his grave, as he was a member of the Society of Rechabites, which was a home for people who were teetotalers and campaigned against the evils of drink. But that was a long time ago. But I have very significant issues about the way in which the bill was drafted. I've come to this relatively late, and my starting point is always to have a look at the bill. And the first one I address is relatively straightforward and simple one, which can easily be remedied, and that is on page 1, where the regulatory principles are stated as the principle of fair and lawful dealing by pub-owning businesses. Well, it's extraordinary that a piece of legislation should legislate to say that people must obey the law. So I would simply take those 3 words out. But that's a comparatively trivial matter. I think there are bigger issues when we look at the definitions of Thai pubs on page 8, paragraph 20, and indeed section 21, where we define what a tenant is and what a pub-owning business is. I'm sort of taken to what happened after the 1991 Agriculture Act, where we saw the introduction of limited partnership as a way of bypassing the provisions of that act between the owner of the land and the owner could terminate at any time. And I think the way in which this is drawn has similar difficulties if you were to have pub-owning businesses that wanted to act in a way. For example, it might be possible to say that if you want to operate a pub that's owned by someone else, you have to become a shareholder in a shared company. And that would not create the landlord-tenant relationship which this bill relies on, but would still create the opportunity within that company organisation that you've established to create a dependency that people have to buy their beer from a particular source. The second thing that one might do if one wanted to thwart the way in which the definitions currently operate might be to operate through a subtenancy, in that the subtenant, the tenant be allowed to create subtenancies. And it appears as the bill is currently structured, that might break the link upon which it depends between the landlord being a pub-owning business and the tenant, because the subtenant would not necessarily be a pub-owning business. Indeed, they are merely a tenant of another company. So I think there are some practical difficulties. But of course, that doesn't mean we should vote against the principles of the bill if our judgment is that it's possible to amend the bill at stage 2 and stage 3 to remedy these, and I think some rather substantial other difficulties there are in the bill. Because when I look at something and I find such straightforward ways of thwarting the means of this bill, I'm not saying I carry with me quite considerable doubts. But then my ingenuity as a non-legally qualified person is substantially less than that of others. So I hope that Parliament will look at this bill very carefully as it proceeds through stages 2 and 3, as I expect it will. I support the principles and will vote for it with some reluctance at decision time tonight. Presiding Officer.